I want to tell you something before I tell you anything else, because this story does not begin where most stories begin and it does not end where you will expect it to end, and if I do not say this first you will spend the whole time waiting for the part where I am redeemed, and I need you to understand that redemption is not what this story is about. This story is about a man who loved a woman so completely and so honestly that even after she broke every promise she had made to him, even after she chose someone else, even after she walked out of a 10-year marriage with the particular confidence of a woman who has decided she deserves better, he did not stop. He did not stop loving her. He did not change the paperwork. He did not take her name off the life insurance policy he had been paying into for 8 years, the one she had never once thought about because she had never once considered that something might happen to him, because people who are busy leaving never think about the person they are leaving in those terms. His name was David. He died on a Tuesday in April, 6 months after our divorce was final, in a car accident on a highway he drove every single day for 10 years while I was married to him and had never once thought about. His lawyer called me on a Thursday. He said there was a matter he needed to discuss. I did not know what it was. I did not know what was coming. And when he told me, I sat in my car in a parking garage for a long time afterward and I held the steering wheel with both hands and I thought about a man who had loved me for 10 years and whom I had spent the last 4 of those years treating like a piece of furniture I had stopped noticing. He had left a note. 2 words. Old habits. I am still not entirely sure I deserve to tell this story. But I am going to tell it anyway because I think there are people watching this who are in the middle of the same mistake I made, who are looking at a good person beside them and seeing only what they are not, and I want them to hear what it costs. Not as punishment. As information. Welcome to Signed in Silence. My name is Maya. And I am the cautionary tale. David and I met when I was 24, at a point in my life when I was just beginning to understand what I was capable of professionally and had not yet understood what I was capable of personally, which meant I was confident in the wrong direction and careless in the one that mattered. He was 27. He worked in civil engineering, which meant he spent his days thinking about how things were built and what made them hold and what happened when the foundations were wrong, and I have thought about that professional context many times since in ways that are not comfortable. He was quiet in the way of people who have decided that words are most valuable when they are precise, which meant he did not talk much but when he talked it landed, and I found that quality attractive in the beginning and gradually, over years, came to mistake it for an absence of depth because I had stopped listening closely enough to hear the depth. We dated for 2 years and got married when I was 26. The wedding was exactly what we both wanted, which in practice meant it was simple and personal and not expensive in the way that things are not expensive when the people planning them have agreed that the money belongs in the house fund rather than the one-day event fund. I had agreed enthusiastically. I had meant it enthusiastically. I note this because I want to be precise about the timeline of my own becoming, which did not happen all at once but gradually, the way water changes things, wearing at the edges of a person until the shape is different and they have not noticed because the change was too slow to feel like change. The first 5 years of our marriage were good. Not perfect in the way of performances, but good in the way of real things, warm and ordinary and built on the specific comfort of 2 people who have learned each other's rhythms and are not performing anything for the other's benefit. David was reliable in every sense of the word. He came home when he said he would. He noticed when I was tired. He built things around the house with the same methodical care he brought to his professional work, and the house gradually became more solid and more ours with every repair and every renovation and every weekend project that I sometimes helped with and sometimes watched from a chair in the garden with a book and a cold drink. He was, in the vocabulary I used then, steady. I meant it as a compliment. I have since understood that I had begun using it as something else. Steady became, in my private vocabulary, predictable. Predictable became, after another year, boring. Boring became, in the way that internal narratives always find their conclusions before the evidence supports them, not enough. I want to be precise about this because the honest version is the only useful one. David did not change. The things I began to find insufficient about him had always been there and had once been the things I most valued. The change was in me, in the particular way of people who have gotten what they wanted and found, in the having of it, that wanting it had been more interesting than the thing itself. I met Connor at a work conference in my 7th year of marriage. He was in marketing and had the particular energy of people in that field, loud and confident and excellent at making things seem more interesting than they were, which is, when you think about it, a professional description of exactly what happened between us. He made me seem more interesting to myself. He asked questions that felt like they were reaching for something in me that had not been reached for in years, and I answered them with a hunger I should have recognized as a warning and which I mistook for evidence that I had been missing something I needed. The affair began at the conference and continued for 18 months. I do not want to characterize it beyond those facts because the characterization is not the point and because Connor does not deserve more space in this story than he has already occupied in my life. What I will tell you is that for 18 months I maintained two versions of myself simultaneously, which is both easier and more expensive than it sounds. Easier because the habits of a long marriage provide the kind of cover that a short relationship never could. The explanations are already built into the structure of daily life and do not require construction. More expensive because the person who pays the cost of maintaining two versions of yourself is always the self that is carrying the weight of both. I was tired for 18 months in a way I attributed to work and to the general demands of adult life, and which I now understand was the specific exhaustion of a person who has fractured her own integrity and is spending enormous energy on the maintenance of the fracture. David noticed the tiredness. He asked about it, gently, in the way he asked everything, and I told him it was work, and he accepted that because he trusted me and because he was the kind of person who takes the explanation he is given and does not go looking for a different one, which is not naivety but is instead the behavior of a person who has decided that the relationship they are in is worth trusting until proven otherwise. He had proven me right for 10 years. I was proving him wrong for 18 months and he did not know it. I ended the marriage in year 10. Not because I was caught. Not because David discovered anything. I ended it because I had convinced myself by then that the marriage was the problem, that my unhappiness was the natural result of being in the wrong relationship, and that leaving was the honest thing, the brave thing, the thing that someone who respected herself and respected David would do rather than continuing in a marriage she was not fully committed to. There is truth in that reasoning, buried under the rationalizations. But the truth was buried deep enough that what I presented to David was the cleaned-up version, the version where I was leaving because we had grown apart and I needed something different, which was true in the way that the last step of a long sequence is true, technically accurate about the ending while erasing everything that led to it. I told him on a Sunday evening. We were in the kitchen, which is where the conversations that matter seem to happen, and I told him I was not happy and I needed something different and I thought we had grown in different directions and that I was sorry. David sat with that for a long time. He was always a person who needed time to process before he spoke, and I sat across from him and watched him understand what I was saying and watched him take it in with the particular quietness of someone who is absorbing something heavy without letting it crush them in front of you. Then he said, "Is there someone else?" I said no. Which was technically true by then, because the affair with Connor had ended 3 months before and I had told myself that ending it first made the marriage's end cleaner, which is the logic of someone who is managing their own guilt rather than respecting another person's right to accurate information. He looked at me for a long moment. I have thought about that look many times since. I do not know, even now, what it contained. I know what I told myself it contained at the time, which was acceptance and sadness and the dignified grief of a good man who was being left for reasons he was being allowed to believe had nothing to do with him. I do not know if he knew. I have wondered about this more than any other question in the time since. Whether he had known and had chosen, in the way of his quiet and precise economy with words, not to say what he knew. Whether the question was genuine. Whether the answer I gave him sat in him the way certain things sit, acknowledged and set aside rather than believed. I will never know. That is one of the things I carry. He was cooperative throughout the divorce proceedings. Not performatively, not in the way of someone managing appearances, but genuinely cooperative in the way of a man who had decided that the end of the marriage did not require the kind of adversarial proceeding that turns two people who once loved each other into opponents. He was fair about the assets. He did not make claims he could have made. He signed what needed to be signed without delay. On the day the divorce was final, he shook my hand. Not in a cold way. In the way of someone who does not know what the appropriate gesture is between two people who have been everything to each other and are now legally nothing, and who defaults to the professional warmth of a handshake because it is honest and it is kind and it does not ask either person for more than they have. I drove away from that courthouse and I told myself I was beginning something. I was not thinking about what I was ending. The 6 months after the divorce were not what I had imagined they would be. I had imagined relief and space and the particular freedom of a life that was entirely my own decisions. What I had was relief and space and a freedom that had the specific quality of silence, which is sometimes exactly what a person needs and which in my case felt, increasingly, less like liberation and more like an absence. Connor had not been a factor in my thinking during the divorce proceedings. The affair had ended. I had not contacted him. He had not contacted me. Whatever he had been to me in those 18 months had resolved into nothing in particular, the way things do when you remove them from the context that animated them and find that the context was doing most of the work. I went on dates. I worked more. I redecorated the apartment I had moved into with the focused energy of someone who is investing in a surface because the things underneath the surface are not yet ready to be looked at. I thought about David occasionally in the way you think about someone whose absence has a specific shape. Not with romantic feeling exactly. More with the particular awareness of the space a person leaves when they have been the architecture of your daily life for 10 years and are suddenly not. I told myself it was adjustment. I told myself it would pass. I told myself I had made the right choice and that the discomfort was simply the cost of growth. Then it was April. And it was a Tuesday. And a highway David had driven every single day for 10 years while I was married to him and had never once thought about. His sister called me first. We had stayed in distant touch, the careful cordial distance of people who were connected through someone who is no longer the connection, and her voice when she called had the quality of a voice that is holding itself together through the precision of delivering information before the grief takes over completely. She told me. I said whatever I said, I do not remember the specific words, only the sensation of the floor becoming uncertain beneath me and the effort of staying in the chair I was sitting in. I went to the service. I sat in the back because I was not sure I had the right to sit anywhere else and because there were people there whose grief was uncomplicated in the way that grief should be uncomplicated, people who had loved him without caveat, and I did not want my presence to require explanation or to cost anyone anything on a day that was already costing everything. His sister saw me and came to me afterward and held my hands and said something kind that I did not entirely deserve and which I have thought about many times since. The lawyer called 2 days later. His name was Mr. Gaines, and he was the kind of lawyer who has delivered difficult news and complicated news and strange news many times and who has developed a particular economy of language for all three, a way of saying things that is clear and not unkind and does not editorialize. He said that David had maintained a life insurance policy for 8 years. He said the beneficiary on the policy was me. He said that David had not updated the beneficiary designation after the divorce. He paused in the way of someone giving you time to understand what you have just heard. I said, he didn't change it. Mr. Gaines said that he had not. He said there was also a note, which David had left with his estate documents, addressed to me. The note was 2 words. Old habits. I sat in my car in the parking garage of Mr. Gaines's building for a long time after that meeting. I held the steering wheel with both hands and I sat with 2 words that contained 10 years and everything I had done to those 10 years and the specific kind of love that does not revise itself even when the person it is directed toward has given it every reason to. Old habits. Meaning, this is what I have always done. Meaning, you were always the person I thought of first. Meaning, some things do not update even when the circumstances that created them have changed. Meaning, I loved you and I am sorry you didn't know how to hold it and I hope you find whatever it was you were looking for when you left. Or none of that. The note was 2 words. I am the one who has been filling them in for the months since. I do not know what he meant. I only know what I understood. I want to tell you what I did with the money and then I want to tell you what I did with the understanding, because both of them matter and neither one of them is the ending you are expecting. The money went to the foundation. David had cared deeply about engineering education for students who could not afford it, which was a cause he had supported quietly for years in the specific way of a person who gives without needing recognition. I spoke to his sister and to the organization he had supported and established a fund in his name, the entirety of the insurance proceeds, no portion kept. Not because I thought it would balance anything, I am not that naive about the math of guilt and restitution. Because it was the closest thing I could think of to returning something to the world that he had given to it, in the form he would have wanted. His sister cried when I told her. She said David would have liked that. I said I hoped so. Neither of us said the other thing, the thing that was present in that conversation, the way something can be present without being spoken, that the money should never have been mine in the first place, and that the fact of it was a kindness I had not earned and could not repay but could at least try to direct in the right direction. What I did with the understanding is harder to describe and less linear and is, frankly, still in progress in the way that the understanding of something large is always still in progress. I went back to therapy, which I had stopped during the marriage, in the way people stop the things that are helping them when they decide they do not need help. I sat across from a therapist and told the full version, the version with all the rationalizations removed, the version where I was not a person who had simply grown and changed and needed something different, but a person who had made specific choices with specific consequences that I had spent considerable energy avoiding looking at directly. Looking at them directly was not comfortable. It was not the kind of discomfort that resolves cleanly into growth and a lesson learned and a better version of yourself emerging on the other side. It was the kind that simply sits with you and teaches you things slowly, over a long time, without resolving into anything tidy. What I have learned, in the months of sitting with it, is something I want to say carefully because I do not want it to sound like wisdom I have earned the right to offer, because I am not sure I have earned it. A good person beside you is not a problem to be solved. Steadiness is not a symptom of insufficiency. The qualities in another person that register, over time, as ordinary are often the qualities that are the most difficult to find and the most expensive to lose, and the moment they begin to register as ordinary is not the moment to look for something more interesting. It is the moment to look more carefully at what is already there. I mistook David's consistency for a ceiling. It was not a ceiling. It was a foundation. And I left the foundation looking for something more exciting and found, in the leaving, that what I had called boring was actually the specific weight of a person who showed up, every day, without drama or performance or the need for an audience, and that showing up every day without drama is one of the rarest and most valuable things one person can offer another. He showed up for 10 years. He showed up after I left, in the form of a policy he never updated and a note that said 2 words and contained everything. I cannot give that back to him. I cannot undo the 10 years or the 18 months or the Sunday evening in the kitchen or any of it. What I can do, and what I try to do, is carry it honestly rather than efficiently, without the editing and the rationalization and the cleaned-up version that makes it easier to look at. He deserved better than I gave him. That is the sentence I live with. Not as punishment, because punishment is just another form of self-focus, but as the accurate description of a fact that I do not get to revise. He was a good man. He loved me for 10 years and then he loved me for 6 months after I left, and then he died on a Tuesday in April and the paperwork still said my name and the note said old habits, and I am still, every day, trying to understand what it means to be the person that note was written to. That is my story. Not a story about justice or documentation or a settlement that came out fairly. A story about a man who was steady and precise and who showed up every day without asking for applause, and a woman who looked at all of that and called it not enough, and the 2 words that told her, finally, what it had actually been. If there is a steady person in your life that you have started calling boring, I am asking you to look again. Not for me. Not for any lesson I have earned the right to teach. Just look again, the way you look at something when you remember that ordinary and insufficient are not the same word, and that the person who shows up quietly every day is showing you something that loud and exciting almost never can. He showed up even after he was gone. I am still learning what to do with that. Subscribe to Signed in Silence. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from. The next story is already waiting. I will see you in the next one.